welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia, and with me on the other line are the dual twin emperors of the Atlanta Film Critics Association. What was the name of those? Jason, you were there for Gladiator II last night. What are the names of our incestuous Malcolm McDowell looking Roman emperors from that movie last night?
One of them was Geta, and the other was like Casadata or something like that.
Yeah.
One of the problems with this film is that I didn't know any characters' names.
Someone was like explaining. I was talking to someone afterwards, and they were like trying to refer to the names of individual people and be like, "You just got to refer to the actors." Like, I'm not going to remember like Roman names or anything like that.
Yeah, and by the way, like the most memorable name was Maximus Aurelius, who was from the last movie.
You can't do better than that. Well, guys, welcome. We're here for episode 2, and this week we're doing something special. We're talking about the filmography of Sir Ridley Scott, because Gladiator II, one of the big anticipated movies of the fall, is coming out in a couple weeks. We're recording this the day after Jason and I saw the movie. Josh, you weren't there, but we're going to make this a full Ridley Scott smorgasbord for people to talk about, and we're going to play kind of a fun game, breaking his filmography into kind of a tier list to help folks who maybe they've only seen a couple of the Riddler's movies, but they want to check out.
Hold on. How is that possible? I mean,
the man's made like 30 movies.
Well, as you say, by my count, he's made 29 films, 29 feature-length films, and I mean, at least, I don't know, a dozen of them have been huge monster hits that everyone has seen. So, I mean, everyone out there is a little bit of a Ridley Scott expert.
Sure. Let's first talking about Ridley himself. I think for me, Ridley Scott is kind of this weird example of like, is he like the best example of like a studio journeyman filmmaker? Like, I don't really think of him as like an auteur in the same way of like Spielberg or a Scorsese, but he's someone that like I feel like there's always a lot of anticipation around his movies because he does big budget spectacle movies with big movie stars that are largely original outside of a couple sequels he's done, and they're pretty much always targeted towards an adult audience, which is a pretty rare thing to have someone who's making movies at the scale he does, making movies just solely for adults in this day and age. What is you guys' relationship to Ridley Scott? What was the first Ridley Scott movie you probably saw? Is he a director you look forward to his stuff? Are you kind of like, he's a hack, I don't really dig him?
Well, first, now I just want to see a Ridley Scott kids movie after that introduction, because he seems like such an if you read interviews, such an eminently patient guy, so
the most delightfully like curmudgeon-y person to like read an interview with.
I'd love to see him just like work with a child actor and just see that behind the scenes footage,
So the thing I would say about Ridley is you're right. He's kind of a journeyman. When I went ahead and looked at all the movies of his that I've seen, and for this exercise, I was sort of putting them into categories. There's just a lot in the middle there. There's a lot that's like, yeah, that's fine, that's good, not great, but it's fine. But the thing about him is, when he does a great job, when he really hits it out of the park, these are just absolute legendary masterpieces and films that last. They're incredibly rewatchable. I mean, like Alien, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, The Martian. These are movies that, if they are on television, I am watching till the end. They are films that capture the imagination of everyone out there in the public. They are films that, to some extent, changed movie making a little bit in terms of like defining genres and setting trends and the such. And we can debate, maybe someone doesn't think those movies, by the way, I haven't even said the word Blade Runner yet. Maybe someone doesn't think that those movies, are truly great films, but I bet if you went out there and surveyed, 100 people, you'd get 80 plus who would say, yes, Alien, Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, The Martian, A+, great films.
What was probably the first Ridley Scott movie that you guys, do you have a memory of like what the first one you would have seen is? Because I was trying to think of that this past week, and the only two I could kind of come to some, like, it was probably for me like either Gladiator or Black Hawk Down were like the two that I was probably like most, or
You're a
Alien.
child.
I
You're
know,
so
but
young.
it's just, when I'm a 13-year-old boy, like Gladiator and Black Hawk Down, those are like the two that like would have most been on my radar.
Yeah, I think for me, just because of the era I grew up in, like I'm sure it was probably something like Legend, because that movie was on TV all the time. But I still don't think I've seen that movie in one sitting all the way through. I've seen the movie just in like 10 and 12-minute chunks, like during commercials on TV. So like I've seen the whole thing, but that was on so much when I was younger. That's probably what it was, but I don't have like a vivid memory of it. So
it's easy. I saw Blade Runner in theaters. That's
okay.
how old I am.
Wow, you were there opening weekend.
I think
I remember seeing Blade Runner in theaters. I also remember seeing Legend, which even to this day, it's a flawed film, but I love it.
So I think the one where, like, just by sheer like age of where I was, making a concerted effort to see it, I think G.I. Jane came out when I was like 16. So that was when I was just like, I had a car and I was seeing everything because I could go to the movies. So mine was probably G.I. Jane, which you probably won't hear from a lot of people.
So let's get into our game. What we're gonna do is we're gonna break up Ridley's filmography into kind of 4 categories. For the sake of understanding, we'll have an A category, which will basically be like these are like the must sees. And then we're gonna have a B category, which is maybe these aren't. This is like this, it's the second tier down, like still really enjoyable movies that I feel like most of us would still go to bat for, but no one's saying they're among his best films. Then I think in the C category we can put movies that they're not bad, but they're either just kind of like forgettable, or like some aspects of them work but others don't. And then we'll skip over D, because let's be real, like you guys were parents. Did you ever see your kid get a D home from school and you were like, well, at least it's not an F? Like a D basically was an F in my household growing up. Like that got you grounded. So we'll just combine that into the F category of like stuff that you can probably just skip. Like, no offense to everyone involved, but these don't work.
As a teacher, we call a D the gentleman's F. It's like, you're very bad at this, but I don't want to like too negatively harm your future.
Right. If we were doing a D category, it would be like, well, that shot is at least composed. So
these are competent actors in the film.
Right. This has at least like a functional story I can understand. So I figured let's go through starting at the very beginning, and then we'll work our way up to Gladiator II. I first want to ask you guys about The Duelists from 1977, which I'm going to go ahead and say I feel like needs to just go into the, our C category. It's not a bad movie, but, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it stars Harvey Keitel and, who is it? Oh, it's Keith Carradine, and both of them playing soldiers during the Napoleonic Wars, and it charts their relationship over several decades of basically just two dudes who don't like each other and just get into duels over and over again. And is like kind of the movie that you would expect Ridley to make now, like a very stylish, kind of expensive looking period piece. But I think even he has sort of a humorous relationship with this movie. Of it came out basically around the same time as Star Wars, and he like tells this funny anecdote about like going to see Star Wars in theaters and just being like, fuck, I'm like so far behind the times right now. Which then makes sense, because then like his next movie is Alien. But do you guys have any strong opinions on The Duelists at all?
So I'll start by saying this, and I'll be done really quickly. I'm not a completist.
Okay.
And I've never seen The Duelist. There, if you're going to go through all 29 films in Ridley Scott's filmography, there are going to be 6 that I haven't seen, and this is one of them.
Well, that's what I was going to say as well. Like, if nothing else, this exercise, like, while fun, also made me realize where my blind spots were, because made me realize like how many I haven't seen and how many that I was like, oh right, that was him.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one for me as well.
I,
So
I I think you guys would enjoy it, while also like it's one of those where I've seen it once. I was like, that was pretty solid. Kind of weird to see Harvey Keitel playing a French soldier, but you just sort of like file it away of like that's a solid like B minus C plus kind of starting point for his career.
well, not to jump too far ahead, but it's a good thing that he learned his lesson with Joaquin Phoenix and Napoleon, right? Because his French accent is incredible.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It should have like that movie like lays the foundation for just like the thing people have made fun of Ridley's historical movies for forever, which is just like, why is no one talking French? Why is no one talking in like a British accent? Why are people just using their? And his answer is always just like F
Shut
off,
up.
basically. Are we all in agreement that like Alien, that's like an automatic A?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, what
Yeah.
are we discussing here?
Yeah.
Look-
Do you guys think this is the best Ridley Scott movie? Because this might be the one that I think I've rewatched the most, and like it lives in my head the most of like all of his other movies.
it's certainly up there. I would argue if it's not the best, it's certainly in the conversation for possibly his most rewatchable.
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably, not from a standpoint of like, oh, I'm going to be the most erudite critic. I think that Gladiator is his best in terms of being a film that I can't even count how many times I've watched that movie. It's not the perfect film, but to me, Gladiator is his best film. Or maybe The Martian. The Martian's really pretty great. But Alien is, I mean, it's groundbreaking.
It is just
and
a
it
perfect
invented
diamond of a movie.
I'm sorry?
I said it's just a perfect diamond of a movie. Like one of those, like, anytime I watch it, I'm like, I know this movie is great, but even then, like, when I rewatch it, it's like, I kind of forget just, like, how insanely good it is and how like, a perfect thrill ride it is.
His ability to mash genres together in that film is really, I mean, to go, okay, sci-fi, yeah, everyone's talking about Star Wars. Let's do it as a horror movie. Let's do it as a monster horror movie. The number of franchises he has spawned, not just Alien, but the number of franchises he has spawned by making that one movie, it's almost too many to count.
Well, I think that's also like a good transition point to Blade Runner, which I think for whatever you think of that movie, like, that I would say is the other movie for me. Like, I think his two like big sci-fi movies are sort of my two favorites of his.
I mean, those are the two most important. There's no question. They're
sort of before and after those movies of in terms of science fiction of like you can't look at anything like The Matrix or just any kind of like cyberpunk thing and not see the influence of Blade Runner.
I mean, yeah. I have nothing to add. Hall of Fame.
I think this belongs to the top.
He could have quit at that moment.
Yeah.
Alien and Blade Runner and been like, I'm out. And we'd go, okay, you're in the Hall of Fame. No problem, buddy.
So I guess this is where we fight, huh? And I have nothing to like, I can't even defend myself. This, I've talked about this in the past that like, as far as Blade Runner goes, I respect it. I understand its place in the genre. To me, it is not a film that I would say I enjoy.
Are you like a vibes guy when you watch movies? Because I feel like Blade Runner is like one of the great examples of like there's kind of a story, but it's kind of not that important, and it's really just a movie that like it's all vibes. It's all just like
it's all atmosphere.
It really is.
I'll say, Josh, really quickly. It is the plot and the whole like mystery that Harrison Ford is unraveling is a little tiresome at times. There's no question about that. I mean, like we've been talking about the word rewatchable. If Blade Runner's on right now and I'm hitting it at about the 30-minute mark or so, I'm like, maybe I'll come back in a little while. Maybe I'll come back a little bit further down the road. I don't need to watch the whole thing from this moment the way I would be with Alien or Thelma and Louise or The Martian or Gladiator.
Jesse, I think you nailed it there. And for me, at least, I'm much more of a sort of coherent, competent narrative person, then let me sort of zone out to how awesome this film feels and looks, right? And that's why I said, like, I can't defend, I'm not going to say that it's not hugely influential to the genre. I'm not going to say that there's not great actors in it, that, the costume design, the sound design, check. Like, I have nothing against that, but it's like, if you were like, hey, do you want to watch Blade Runner or one of his other 30-something movies, like, I'm probably going to watch another one just because, like you said, like, even something like Alien, which is far darker and more depressing, I'm like, I still want to hang out with these guys on the spaceship,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you guys put Blade? Because I would absolutely put Blade Runner in like the top tier, but I'm also someone who's coming of like, I love rewatching that movie and just sort of soaking in like the rain and the neon and the like Angelus score, and it just like falling into that dream space to me is like so captivating. But
I gave it a B. I have it as a
B.
That's what I did. Yeah, I wouldn't consider this. I mean, in his filmography, yes, like from sort of like a we have to do this kind of standpoint, yes, it's top tier Ridley Scott. But just on my personal list, it's going B for me, just because like I respect it even if it's not for me.
Okay. After Blade Runner, we have Legend, which Josh, you brought up earlier, is a movie I think is kind of bad, but I also know, Jason, you admitted off mic
a
couple weeks ago that you love this movie. So the floor is yours to convince us of the majesty of Legend.
Okay, so first of all, Tim Curry as Darkness or Satan, whatever he is out of this world good. He is hamming it up all over the screen, like, and his makeup, the creature design, unbelievable that they did this in the early 80s. Like, if you did this today, you'd go, it looks really good. They didn't have the ability to do this today, do this back then the way they can today. So he looks unbelievable. The soundtrack, the score, there's a song, a Brian Ferry song called Is Your Love Strong Enough, that sort of forms the backbone of a lot of the score of this film. I literally have that song on repeat. I probably listened to that song 30,000 times in my lifetime. Mia Sara is incredibly gorgeous. She was this revelation when we found her in this film and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And it stars Tom Cruise and a bunch of elves. And it's bonkers. I know that the story doesn't necessarily make sense all the time, but it's incredibly stylish to look at. I mean, like, off the charts stylish. And I have fun basking in the unicorns and the craziness of all the creature design. Yeah, it's a little incoherent from a story standpoint. And Tom Cruise is like, at times I think he's like, what the hell am I doing in this film?
Yeah, weird that they never worked together again. I wonder if there was some butting of heads, considering how strong-willed both of them are known to be.
Yeah,
I don't care. I love that film. I love it.
So it sounds like for Jason, this is your Ridley Scott vibes movie.
Yes.
In Blade Runner. And I think it says a lot that the first thing that you say you love it, and I'm like, it was cheesy for what it was in the 80s. But the thing we both said was Tim Curry. Or like, you said it and I was thinking it. And in a movie that comes out a year before Tom Cruise does Top Gun, you're like, Tim Curry's amazing in this. And so I think that kind of says everything there is to say.
Yeah, I will agree with you guys. Like, I think the movie is very, very like stylish and just like looks incredible. Maybe part of I wonder if this is maybe like a generational thing too, which is something that I know all of us like definitely want to explore on this podcast through the future of just sort of like, this was not a movie I grew up with. I probably only saw it like a couple of years ago. And I think there's something to me about like the heightened fantasy visuals with sort of how like utterly serious the movie is taking itself that like almost fits against me, but like I can't deny that like as something to put on your TV to like show off how great your pixels are or something like that. Like, it is a gorgeous looking movie from just like a total crafts level.
Look, my last thing on it is, unlike the two of you, I saw this in theaters. And I think that kind of experience, being immersed in that world, because this was Ridley, Alien, Blade Runner, Ridley Scott is a world builder. There's no question about that. But for me, being a teenager immersed in this world with Mia Sara, with Tim Curry, with Tom Cruise, and this fantasy place, I was taken away in a way that I don't think you can be when you're watching a movie at home. And I think it's lasted with me because of that.
So I'm curious, have you guys seen kind of his two other 80s movies, his sort of two 80s crime movies, Someone to Watch Over Me, which
Nope.
A movie that doesn't exist. That's basically how I'm going to describe it. It stars Tom Berenger and Mimi Rogers and Lorraine Bracco, and is like a romantic kind of crime drama about a cop, and he's got to protect a witness who sees a murder.
Moving on.
Pretty forgettable movie. And then there's Black Rain, which is... Have you seen Black Rain, Jason?
I did see, again, I saw Black Rain in theaters. Because, by the way, back then, there was no other option, really.
at a time where Michael Douglas is a pretty huge star, this is for anyone who hasn't seen, is Michael Douglas. And who's the other person? It's been a few years since I've seen
Andy
this movie.
Garcia? Is that right?
Yeah.
Is it Andy Garcia as two cops basically fighting against the Yakuza?
It's got a lot of cool, like almost samurai kind of stuff in it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, can I spoil a movie that's 30 years old? Andy Garcia dies about halfway through the movie. It's really cool.
Yeah, is that the one where I know there's like a really like graphic beheading scene that happens in the movie. Is that
yes.
Yeah. Weirdly, to kind of give an insight into my relationship with this movie, I kind of just file this in that weird period of 80s movies where American pop culture was just being exposed to the other side of the world, and there was just a lot of movies at this time that were kind of like, Asians, so foreign, so weird. And like, this is totally a movie that's like, I remember there's like a scene where Michael Douglas picks up a thing of sushi and like cooks the fish with his lighter, and then like turns to a Japanese person and is like, in America, we cook our food before we eat it, which it's just kind of like a funny thing to see in today's age when like you can get sushi at the gas station, and just sort of like it's not even like an offensive thing. It's just sort of like, I can't take this movie seriously because like we just don't find like Japanese culture as weird as like we did in the late 80s. But that's
this
me
was
as
the
millennial
one
saying this.
That revisiting the filmography on IMDb, this was the biggest one that I was like, oh right, that was Ridley Scott. Mm-hmm. Just because it feels so sort of, out of place compared to his others. Like, because, you've got the good actors, but you were talking about like world building and vibes. There's really not a lot of that there. I mean, there's some atmosphere.
He goes to Japan.
Yeah. So, but when you were talking about how this was also a time where it's like, isn't Asian culture crazy? Like 3 years before this is Big Trouble in Little China, which does this stuff so much better and points out the ridiculous of Americans to judge them when we're, Kurt Russell's doing a bad John Wayne impression, or a really good bad John Wayne impression for the whole movie. So it looks like something like that in that era accomplishes something even better than something like Black Rain is intentionally trying to do. If that makes sense.
I would gladly stop talking about Ridley Scott and do the rest of the podcast on Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
We'll have to do a John Carpenter episode at some point.
Yes.
I assume we all three love Thelma and Louise, which I rewatched like a couple weeks ago because it was on the Criterion Channel, and was just like, I remember this being good, but this is like so much, but like this is, I think, his third best movie my third favorite movie of his, and is just, I think, such a perfect example of his skill as a director. Of like, he's someone who I feel like really lives or dies by the scripts he has, and this is him with a really good script with two great movie stars in Gina Davis and Susan Sarandon, and him just being kind of a master stylist and knowing, I'm going to shoot this like a John Ford movie, and like instantly make something that's like, you're watching it and you're like, this feels iconic as I'm watching it. What do you guys love about Thelma and Louise?
I mean, first of all, it's worth noting that this is the film that introduced all of us to Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how significant this movie is. And the other thing to me was I just remember feeling like all the characters were real and made sense to me. I didn't feel like I was watching Hollywood characters. I felt like I was watching real people. And to do that in a movie where the heroes were women, and they were women who were very much asserting their ability to impact the world around them and the story and the such in a way that I don't want to say this is the first pro-feminist movie or something silly like that, but it is somewhat groundbreaking for what it did with having female characters. It's an excellent movie. If one of you said, I think this is his best film, I wouldn't argue with it.
I think it also just speaks to just how depressingly different the mainstream theatrical world is, because this is a modestly budgeted movie for grown-ups where nothing, I mean, huge things happen, right? But not,
nothing blows up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is just about, adults dealing with adult problems with some really good actors and massive critical and commercial hit. And not to get all like, they don't make them like this anymore. That's like the most cliche ever. But I just think like from a business standpoint, they don't make them like this. Like they don't find, there's no economic reason to do it. So they don't.
Yeah. I would love to get like 3 or 4 of these. Like, I don't understand how Hollywood can't just do 3 or 4 of these of like, who are hot, really charismatic movie stars, get them a good script that gives them things to do and like interesting parts to play on screen, and then match it with, you don't need to get Martin Scorsese, like match it with a director who has, as I said, a sense of style, a sense of scope that can then like take something that, as you pointed out, Josh, is kind of modestly budgeted, but like it feels like this big sweeping movie when they're sort of out there in that convertible out in the American desert. I assume we all agree this is an A. This is near the top. If you haven't seen
no question about it, Jesse.
I'll rephrase what I said earlier. It's not that they wouldn't make this today, but if they did, it would be like an 8-episode limited series on Hulu that's 6 hours too long.
Or it would star 2 TikTok stars, and it would be on Netflix, and it would look like diarrhea, basically.
Right.
And Jesse, I think the thing that's missing, like you were saying, why doesn't Hollywood do this more often? Why can't we do more of these? You said script. This is a great script, and I think those are harder to find than we may think. When we eventually, at the end of this, get to Gladiator II, I'm going to rip the script. The script is terrible, and I think one of the problems that I've seen over and over and over again this year from various movies is I just think, frankly, and maybe it's a function of the strike, or I don't know, but I think scripts, it's just hard to find a script as good as Thelma and Louise.
So let's bulldoze through the rest of the 90s, which I would not say are going to be a lot of high hitters on our list. We have
say this is his valley, I think.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you have 1492 Conquest of Paradise, or I think as I sent it to you guys, 1492 Conquest of Pooh, which this is his worst movie, guys. Like if you haven't seen this movie, I would not wish you to watch this movie. It is an excruciatingly boring Christopher Columbus biopic.
I think you're being really hard on hours 18 through 22. Like that's when it really starts to cook.
Yes. With Christopher Columbus, a famous Spaniard being played by French actor Gerard Depardieu, and
he's a foreigner.
This movie kind of trying to have its cake and eat it too, and be like, Christopher Columbus, what a great man, and the Indians kind of got like the Native Americans got some bad things happened to him, but it wasn't his fault. It was everyone else around him. Just an absolute garbage movie.
I heard terrible things about this. I've never seen it, and I'm glad I've never seen it.
Yeah. Then we have White Squall, which this is kind of the movie I imagined, like the perfect example of like the C category of like, I would not say should be at your top of Ridley Scott movies to watch, but it's not bad. It's pretty entertaining. It's basically like what if Dead Poet Society, but on the high seas, and you have Jeff Bridges as the instructor that, you know, encourages this group of young men who are all I've heard a lot of funny stories about this movie from people that were a little bit older than me. Like, if you were a young woman or even a young man and having a sexual awakening as a teen in the mid 90s, this was, I think, I've heard is a pretty big movie for those people, because it's just a lot of teen heartthrobs from the mid 90s on a boat sailing around the ocean with Jeff Bridges. You guys seen White Squall?
It's one of those that I've seen bits and pieces of it on TV, but it never struck me enough to be like, I need to sit down and watch the whole thing.
Yeah,
it, like you said, it just looked like yet another sort of coming of age drama, you know?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I never got to see it, but I will say that when you sort of look at the cast, I think it's telling that, like, you know, Ryan Phillippe, maybe Scott Wolf, like, these people did not become big stars.
No.
And usually a film like this with a bunch of young, good-looking guys, you look back on it in 10 years, you know, like The Outsiders or something, you're like, oh my God, look at all the people in that movie.
Yeah.
And you go down the cast of this film, you're like, there's nobody interesting in this film.
This is a lot of, like, very specific... Charles. Yeah, these are a lot of very specific, like, people for their moment, I would say. Yeah. Let's talk about G.I. Jane, which I'm gonna sit back because I don't really like this movie, but as I think Jason you and I have had a conversation about this, I feel like this is a real, like, you had to be there to understand the hype around G.I. Jane and how much this movie was being pushed and talked about in the public. Whereas me, millennial, I watched this when I was like 28 and saw it and was like, Demi Moore is pretty good in this movie. Viggo Mortensen's great. This movie is kind of, in my opinion, sort of like a bad, like, lip service ideology movie, in my opinion. But what do you guys think? Because you guys were there when it came out. I was just a child.
Now, keep in mind,
I mean, I like G.I. Jane. Go ahead, Josh. Go.
Keep in mind, I haven't seen this in forever. So maybe that says more about, like, it's not one that I'm like, I can't wait to watch that again. I remember watching it when it came out. I think again when it hit, it would have been VHS at the time. And thinking, yeah, that was, I enjoyed that. And I know, like you said, a lot of it was like, it was a big cultural moment because she did this in Striptease back to back. And she was making headlines for, like, highest paid actress. Demi Moore has reached the top of the A-list. And then they both came out, and I know Striptease bombed. I can't remember how well G.I. Jane did. I don't think it did amazing.
It didn't do that. I mean, relative to expectations, it wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't the huge hit people expected it to be.
So yeah, it was sort of like, this is her moment, and then it's gone. You know, but I remember thinking she did really well in this. That, like you said, this is the first time I was like, who's this Viggo Mortensen guy? Like, I'd seen him in other movies, but this is the first time that I was like, who the heck is this? And so those were my main takeaways from it. So I don't think it's as bad as everybody says it is, but I'm not going to sit here and try to say it's up there with, you know, Alien and Thelma and Louise or anything.
So as someone who was around during that time, this is a film that absolutely has not aged well. Because a lot of the, you know, feminist and sexist kind of things that it was driving at, we now look at and we're like, you know, what are you even doing here? Mm-hmm. But at the time, that it was significant to do that kind of thing. And, you know, in the wake of Ridley Scott making, you know, Alien into a movie that had a female hero in an action movie, Thelma and Louise, even though there isn't a lot of action, you know, here he is back at the same trough, so to speak, with his main character being a woman, which is just not, you know, didn't happen a lot in Hollywood. It happens a little bit more today. I look back fondly on G.I. Jane. I'm like Josh. I haven't seen it in a long time. I have noticed it on cable every now and then, and when I come across it, unless it's like the training stuff with her and the other Marines, and Viggo Mortensen is just great. That's, you know, the classic training montage kind of things.
Yeah. And then I remember
the hell that they're putting her through. That's a lot of fun. The rest of the movie is very forgettable. Anne Bancroft plays a senator in it who's just like, I guess she's kind of evil. I'm not even sure, you know.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the inciting thing of the movie is like the senator saying like we need to get women into, I forget if it's like special ops or Navy SEALs or something like that, but
it's the SEALs. Yeah, Navy
yeah,
SEALs.
but if like I don't want to, there's some sort of weird thing where she's like, I don't want to put it in a piece of legislation because it'll be killed. So I need one of my assistants, or played by Demi Moore, to go be in the Navy SEALs so she can prove my point. So then I can have an easier time putting this. It's like this very, very complicated thing that like you kind of don't need, when like you could just make it Demi Moore wants to be a Navy SEAL because she wants to serve her country, but instead it has this like very complicated scaffolding to like get you into that story.
Yeah, which is totally unnecessary, because everything people remember about this movie is kind of the vibes thing again. It's like, look how sweaty everybody is. Look, they made a big deal out of like, look at the head shaving scene. Like, she has amazing hair and she shaves it in real time. They had to do it in one take. You know, it was that kind of conversation that revolved around it. I don't think anybody even then was like, this is a really compelling narrative, you know?
So then a few years later, Ridley gets another comeback. This is, I feel like, the story for like a few years is like, a few decades is like Ridley makes like one like out of the park hit like cultural movie, and then kind of has a couple misses in a row and people kind of write him off, and then 2000 he comes back with Gladiator, which probably was the first R-rated movie I ever saw. It was a giant hit, won Oscars, made Russell Crowe a movie star overnight. What do you guys have to say about Gladiator all these decades later?
Go for it, Jason.
I mean, I still to this day can't believe that he didn't win Best Director for that film. It's kind of absurd that he didn't. The staging of all the, I mean, we'll probably talk about it when we talk about Gladiator II, but the staging of the fights in the Colosseum is just like off the charts great. He really shows off his directorial chops in this, because even though the camera's moving around a lot, even though all the players in these battle scenes are on the move, you have a great sense of what space you're in. You're following the action. It's not just this, so often action is just frenetic. And as an audience, we're just like, oh, someone's swinging a blade here and a punch there. And in one of the things I vividly remember about Gladiator is I understood what was happening at every damn moment of that movie. And that is not easy to pull off in complicated multi-character action scenes the way he did it. And at the same time, there's a very emotional story. There is not a single character in that movie that you don't understand their motivations. You don't understand what they're thinking and feeling. It's easy to go, oh, it's just a Roman sandal and swords story, but it's a very, very emotional movie at its heart. And hands running through wheat will never be the same after that movie.
And this is one of those I really need to revisit. And then when I saw that Gladiator 2 was coming, I told myself I wanted to wait until right before I saw Gladiator 2, which now I'm hearing may not be the best idea. But it's one of those that when I saw it at the age I did, I saw it after all the hype. And so I think I need to see it, now, so that.
Wait, Josh, have you not seen it in the intervening? You haven't seen it lately?
I think I've seen it like twice since it came out. So I need to rewatch it as like a 40-something, because when I saw it
with you, Josh, of like it's a movie I really like, and I definitely think we all agree like it should be like it should be in the A category, but it's weirdly a movie that just sort of like it was not compared to something like Alien. Like it was never one of those things where I like rewatched it a bunch, and that just sort of speaks to kind of my interests. But I rewatched it like a couple nights ago before our screening of Gladiator 2, and not to spoil too much of I think our thoughts on Gladiator 2, but I was surprised seeing like, oh, the first one's like a pretty simple movie in terms of understanding the stakes. Like it's a revenge movie that then turns into like a couple political people coming to Russell Crowe and being like, actually, like, we need to help you get your revenge because the emperor is becoming like over the top tyrannical, and like we basically need you to not only get your revenge but help us do a coup, essentially. And just like that kind of
you guys are both
it.
You're both underselling this movie massively. I've seen this
start
to finish
movie.
at least a half dozen
We're
times.
agreeing with you. This
is a great film.
Yeah, and I think
rips. I'm not going to argue. Like Gladiator, it's still
we're not disagreeing.
Ass.
I think it's just like when I saw it, because I came after the hype that was like, you know, greatest thing since Citizen Kane or whatever. I was expecting amazing, and only, I'm using finger quotes for people that can't, you know, you can't see a podcast. Yeah, I'm using finger quotes for like, it was only really, really good. And so I think I need to go back now that all the hype has kind of gone away from it and kind of approach it as its own thing again.
I don't know. I think both of you have undersold it a little bit. I think you said really good. I think it's a great film.
Academy Award winner Gladiator. We are underselling.
Yeah.
I keep on going back to, again, the emotion of all the characters. You know what Connie Nielsen, you know what Djimon Hounsou, you know what Russell Crowe, you know what every single one of them are thinking at every moment. And that is not easy to pull off.
Okay. True. So then the following year, Ridley cranks out 2. We have Black Hawk Down and Hannibal, his sequel to my beloved Silence of the Lambs. I'm going to pause it and say Black Hawk Down should go in the B category. A movie I have great admiration for and think as like a feat of directing is like really incredible, kind of what he does in just sort of putting you as an audience in like, this is kind of how chaotic and scary it would be to just be in the middle of a firefight. Yeah. While also a movie that, this is going to sound like a bit of a trite complaint, but like, it's a really tough hang of a movie. Like it's not exactly one that like I want to revisit. I've maybe only seen it like twice ever, just because it's a tough sit. It's a really intense movie. Yeah. Hannibal, as I said, I love Silence of the Lambs. I think Scott's sequel is just kind of gross and like
it's an abomination. It's terrible.
It's the bad combination of a really trashy movie that is like taking itself so deathly serious.
Well,
and like,
so the thing to note about Hannibal is Thomas Harris, the author of all these movies. I read the book before the movie came out. I was a big fan of his other books. I read this book, and when I read it, I was like, that's kind of unfilmable. Like
it's kind of an FU book, isn't it? Yeah. Like, isn't it a book he wrote basically to be like, let's see you try and turn this into a movie, basically?
Yeah. Yes, that is what he did, and he was correct. It just doesn't work as a movie at all.
I think I think it's kind of fitting that both of these.
It has killer pigs. It has killer pigs.
That's right.
Yeah, but yeah, I think both of these movies coming out in the same year is kind of fitting, because this is Ridley Scott in both of his modes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, say what you will about him as a filmmaker, and we are, right? We're trying to rank these, and most of the time he feels like a guy who goes for it. And sometimes you get, Black Hawk Down with that, where you're like, yeah, this is fantastic, but I never want to watch it again because I'm really bummed out now. And then you also get Hannibal, which is what the hell is this?
Yeah. So let's put Black Hawk Down in our B category. You guys fine with that?
Sure.
Yeah. And then I think we can throw Hannibal into the garbage pile. What do you guys think about Matchstick Men from 2003, which is one I really enjoy? Like, this is kind of, to me, like my ideal B pick of like a movie I would not rank among his best, but like is this very fun caper comedy with Nicolas Cage and Sam Rockwell, and who is it that plays Nicolas Cage's? Oh, it's Alison Lohman playing Nicolas Cage's like estranged daughter that he reconnects with.
Back in
just
the
like
news again.
A really fun movie. Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoy it. I think it's saw this one in the theaters, and coming a few years after Usual Suspects and The Sixth Sense, like after the twisty movie had kind of worn out its welcome, like it had waited just long enough to where you could have a movie with like some pretty fun, interesting turns again, and not feel like they were doing it just to try to psych out the audience. It felt like it was like a genuine part of the story. So Nicolas Cage is really great in this. Sam Rockwell is like really hitting his stride here. This is like when Sam Rockwell is making several projects that really blow him up into superstardom. So yeah, I think I'm with you. Like, it's not, one of his best films ever, but it's one that still holds up, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, my feeling. So I haven't seen it in a long time. I also, like Josh, saw it in theaters. I remember thinking, yeah, this is pretty good. I'm a sucker for the the con man caper kind of movie. Those are easily among my favorite sort of genres, so to speak. And I remember being like, yeah, this is good, but I don't remember a ton about it, and I haven't seen it in years. It is not a film that makes its way onto cable regularly or anything like that. It never crosses my Netflix queue. I'm not even sure what service would have this movie. So it's tough for me looking back on it, because I'm like, I remember the characters that were in it. I remember there was a scheme at the center of it. And if you said to me, I've never seen it before, I'd probably go, oh yeah, check it out. It's pretty good. But if you ask me for more than that, I'm going to be like, I don't really remember.
So the next one to talk about is kind of an interesting one, which is Kingdom of Heaven, which is a movie that was a big bomb when it came out. And I would say the theatrical version of this movie is really not good. Like, impressive staging, great scope. This is basically Ridley Scott's like making a movie about the Crusades with Orlando Bloom at the center of it. However, this movie is one of his movies that, we didn't talk about this with Blade Runner, but Ridley often has these director's cuts that will sometimes cause people to reassess his movies. And this is one where I wouldn't say I'm among the people that think like the director's cut to Kingdom of Heaven is a masterpiece, but is definitely one that, like, once that director's cut came out, is like, oh, I finally like understand this movie. And like, it is basically like, comparing the director's cut to this is Ridley Scott made this huge sweeping epic, like Lawrence of Arabia style epic about the Crusades, and touches on all of these themes about like religious fundamentalism and all the like intertwining politics of the region at that time, and has this huge ensemble cast. And basically the studio was like, can you just kind of like can you whittle this down to be like Gladiator but for Orlando Bloom? And the director's cut, I feel like what it adds is a lot more explanation about like what the sort of politics are of the area and of the time, and helping you better understand the stakes of the movie, as well as giving more detail to the characters and helping you understand more of why they're making the decisions they are. Have you guys seen the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven?
Yeah, that's why I said I'm going to have to like bow out of this one, because I remember not being impressed with the theatrical, and I've heard from literally everybody that the director's cut vastly improves it. I have it sitting on my shelf. It's one of those where I'm like, I got to find 4 hours to watch it,
Yeah, it is very long, but I would love to have a conversation with you about it. Like, once
it's
you watch it.
It's definitely one I want to see.
Yeah, because I'm like you. I like remember renting the first or the theatrical cut and being like, this is awful. Like, this is, the man can like film a battle scene like no one else, but this is boring and confusing. And the one problem the director's cut still has is like Orlando Bloom is just kind
miscast.
of like a limp fish, basically. Like that this weird mid 2000s period where people were like, he popped in Lord of the Rings, he popped in Pirates of the Caribbean. What if we put him at the center of something? And it just didn't work. But Jason, do you have any Kingdom of Heaven thoughts?
No, like you guys, I remember seeing it in theaters and thinking, well, that was terrible. And even though, again, it's very competently staged and put together. There's no question Ridley knows what he's doing on a battlefield. But I didn't enjoy it, and I haven't revisited it. Like Josh said, I've heard from many people that the director's cut is way, way better. I think I have such a sort of sour memory of it that I've always been like, do I really want to go back and do that again? So it's a blind spot for me.
Yeah, I can agree with that. That was definitely the opinion I had for a while until I just did it. But we are gonna put a good year at.
Speaking of blind spots,
yeah, or that's definitely going in the masterpiece canon, correct?
Never saw it.
I'm gonna do my best to describe to you guys the stakes of this movie, just because I want to get your reaction. This is basically a Ridley Scott attempting to do a kind of Jerry Maguire-esque movie about a very rich, entitled investment banker played by Russell Crowe, who inherits his uncle's winery in France. And much of the dramatic tension of this movie comes down to, will I sell this winery and make a boatload of money, or will I keep the winery, live out the rest of my days in the beautiful French countryside drinking wine?
I think that's why I never saw it, is because even the like, this was also, I think, when I kind of fell for the paparazzi media depiction of this is like Russell Crowe in his off season, and I'm like, I don't like this guy anyway, and this looks like, oh no, this good-looking rich guy has too many money issues. I was like, I don't want to deal with that.
It's a real, like, rich person's first world problems sort of movie where the whole time you're just like, I really don't care, dude. It sounds like your life's going to be pretty fantastic, either decision you make.
Well, this was it. Oh, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, you guys talk about it all you want. I never saw a good year. I never had any desire to see a good year. It never got reviews or attention that made me say, oh, check that one out. So,
yeah, that's where I am too.
Speaking of media hype, afterwards 2007 does American Gangster, a movie I like and have watched on cable a bunch. Obviously Denzel Washington, Russell Crowe, 70s crime epic. I'm maybe a little burned by, like, I bought into the hype so hard when this movie was coming out of, like, it's Denzel and Crowe at their peak. It's Ridley Scott. Jay-Z is doing, like, a soundtrack album to accompany it. Like, this is going to be the single greatest American movie. And then watched it, and it was like, that was a pretty solid crime movie, but not the greatest thing ever made. What do you guys think of American Gangster? I think of this as, like, a B to me, but
that's where I am. I think
no, I have this in my A category. It's the bottom of my A category. But I think it's a really, really good film. I think Washington's performance is fabulous. Ruby Dee is in this. She's really great in it as well. It's not, Russell Crowe isn't nearly as good as he is in many other. This is sort of, as you guys were saying, he was in a little bit of a decline here, and I don't think this is the film that rescued him from it. But it's a really enjoyable crime drama, and it's different than others because, you know, as we often talk about, Ridley Scott, this is an African American, a black crime lord, and we just hadn't had stories like that, at least that I was aware of prior to seeing this. And with Denzel, I mean, come on, it's a no brainer.
Yeah, I think everything you just said is why it's kind of in the B category for me rather than A, but I think we're just coming at it from different directions but saying the same thing, is because when you call a movie American Gangster and you have a performance as amazing and charismatic as you do from Denzel Washington, but then you devote half of the movie to Russell Crowe's side, it feels like you're trying to do a Heat thing with De Niro and Pacino, but Crowe in this movie is not Pacino in Heat, and so it feels like every time Denzel's not on screen, you're like, okay, when can we get back to Denzel?
I would 1,000% agree. That I've never thought of it that way, but I think the Crowe sections of the movie are kind of, you know, he's not bad, but you're just sort of like, the Denzel stuff is just like so much more fun, and he is just like chewing on the scenery like it's just like a fat T-bone steak. That
I might have put this in the A just because I was trying to find additional films to put in Ridley Scott's A category, but if you want me to say B plus, I'm happy saying that.
No, the A stuff in American Gangster is A stuff. It's just, I figure, law of averages. You know, the Denzel stuff is A, the Russell Crowe stuff is like C plus, so that kind of gets you to a B.
So, speaking of another movie that I remember seeing the previews for and being like, that's got to be like one of the greatest movies ever made, and then like it winds up just being like okay and kind of forgettable. Body of Lies, which if I just imagine like if you stopped someone on the street and said like, did you know that there is a movie from the late 2000s directed by Ridley Scott, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as like a CIA agent trying to take down a terrorist cell, and like a fat Russell Crowe is like the smarmy like dude behind the desk. Like I feel like most people would be like, that sounds awesome, why have I never heard about that? And the reality is it's a pretty mediocre movie.
Yeah, exactly. I saw it in the theater, remembered walking out of the theater going, that's pretty good. And if you put a gun to my head right now and asked me anything about it, I'm dead.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Jason, have you seen Body of Lies?
No, you practically summed up my exact feelings about the film, which is like, I was like, I remember seeing this. I remember thinking, yeah, it's okay. And like, yeah, the moment I left the theater, I'm like, what was that about again? It's just, it's not a film that lasts in your memory at all. And considering how great the filmography is here, or how good to great the filmography is here, this I put this one in the C.
I would agree.
Me too.
One I would just kick to the trash is Robin Hood. A real like, I saw this when it came out. I was like, that is one of the most boring movies I've ever seen. Granted, I was like 15 when this came out, but still not a movie. You know what? I'm gonna drop a hot take right here. I really don't care about Robin Hood. Like the Robin Hood mythology, I'm good. I don't need Hollywood to explore that anymore. I really don't care.
Well, they certainly have tried. So
yes.
I think I'm with you on this one. It's, you've got like an early Oscar Isaac performance as like one of the smarmy villains, but
he's King John.
Yeah, and you don't really have a lot going for it. But what's really frustrating about this one is that the original version of the story sounds way more interesting than what ended up being made, which is, if I'm remembering this right, it was that the sheriff of Nottingham was Robin Hood. That
interesting.
Sort of
I remember hearing it was kind of a
persona.
flip thing, like it was the story told through Sheriff
yeah.
But and like Robin Hood was more like a heat thing of like,
gotcha.
Can he catch the person who's like stealing from the crown and stuff? And then I guess Russell Crowe came on and was like, no, I want to play Robin Hood. And then so they just made it Gladiator in the Middle Ages, but it was super boring.
And not only I want to play Robin Hood, I want it to be a Robin Hood origin story, and I'm 50, like...
Jason, are you going to chime in saying Robin Hood is actually one of the great undersung masterpieces of the 2010s?
No. In fact, there have been so many Robin Hood movies over the year. I'm trying to see if maybe I'm getting this one confused with other ones.
You probably are. I did the same thing.
Yeah. It is yet another Ridley Scott film that I'm like, yeah, I remember seeing that in theaters. I remember thinking, yeah, it's fine. And then I've not revisited it in well over a decade and have little lasting memories of it. Other than as we've said a couple times lately, this is sort of the Russell Crowe era where he's mostly doing misses, not hits. And this falls right in the middle of it.
To kind of go back to what Jesse was saying about we've had enough Robin Hoods, I get the 4,000 Robin Hood movies and the 4,000 King Arthur movies mixed up in my head. I'm like, is this the Russell Crowe Robin Hood, or is this like the Jude Law where he's bad and King Arthur? Like all of that kind of mushes together into one boring movie for me.
Yeah, and it's weird because like some of this, like there's no copyright to Robin Hood. You know what I mean? Like it's all in the public domain, but it's weird. Like we have
it's free IP
coming out. Yeah,
it is free IP. I mean, like that's valuable.
But it's weird even thinking to other free IP stuff. Like I would love to just every few years see someone's Dracula, but like if I never have to see another Robin Hood in my life, I'm pretty good. Like that's how little I care.
We've got it.
Yeah. Next we're gonna
he robs from the rich and gives to the poor. Jesse, did you know that?
I did. The next two are two of my like dear favorite. Like I'm gonna go to bat for these. I feel like both of these get a bad rap. First up is Prometheus, which was a hit but was very divisive. This is sort of his return to the Alien universe in a sort of kind of not really prequel that I think is more of a spin-off movie than a prequel. I think a movie that holds up really well, looks 1,000 times better than like 90% of the blockbusters that come out today. And sure, it's got its faults and it's silly in places, but it is as just sort of like a big, ambitious, hard R-rated adult science fiction movie. I think it's pretty fun, and like I enjoy the Michael Fassbender performance in there. I enjoy all the like gross creature stuff and the like octopus birth scene, even though that feels depraved to say. Are you guys with me? Are you in the Prometheus hive of like Prometheus is actually secretly really good?
So here's the thing I would say about Prometheus, which is that if you can just say, all right, I'm going to ignore how stupid, how phenomenally, unbelievably stupid these characters act and just go with it, it's a lot of fun. Because I remember walking out of that screening and being like, wow, that was great. And then I turned my brain back on and I started thinking about it. I went, oh, they just did some you can't believe that they do it. It doesn't make sense that they do it. This film has been picked apart by the internet like a million different times. But again, if you kind of turn your brain off and just enjoy it for the atmosphere, for the scares and the such, for the effects and how gorgeous it looks, I think it's a good movie. I make this a B, but I totally get the people who are like, it's an F because they picked it apart so much.
Yeah,
those people don't know how to have fun. That's my take.
I'm pretty much with everything Jason says. I think it's 2/3 of a really good movie, but I would put it more C than B. When we compare it to his next visit to this world, this is way better. But the issues with me are I'm not a pick apart kind of plot holes person, but for me, I think like if you're gonna have characters making stupid decisions so that we can watch them die horribly, it makes sense in the first one when they're space truckers, right? Like
Fair,
they're just
and here they're like scientists and they're like, I'm gonna touch the weird scorpion worm.
Yeah, these are guys with doctorate degrees in alien biology who are like, let me touch this thing without a spacesuit on. Like it's just you've got anytime you have people making stupid decisions purely so the story can keep going, that's when you lose me.
And I think one of the things that hurts this film is he made this film with Guy Pearce. That was like a viral video internet thing to set up the story in this movie. And I think that part of the deal with Guy Pearce was that, I'll put you in the regular movie as well. You're just going to have to, we're going to use some makeup and make you look older because this, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Guy Pearce's character and that all the subplot involving him is stupid, and it removes you from the movie. Like he comes in, final half hour or so, and everything stops making sense.
I kind of like how silly it is, though. like maybe that's like my I don't really like take the I've come to peace with like the aspects of this movie that are like a little sillier, and like I definitely agree with you. Walking out, I was like, why did they cast Guy Pearce to be an old man? And now I watch it and I'm just like, this is just kind of a funny, weird choice that Guy Pearce is under all this old man makeup.
Yeah, have you seen the prequel thing that I'm talking about?
I remember it because it's like a TED Talk or something like that, right?
No. It's a full like video kind of thing that it is partially set up as like him talking about the future. Yeah, but it was an effort at viral marketing. And a good idea, I think. And I remember seeing it and thinking like, ooh, I'm really even more excited for this movie. But yeah, to then bring him into the movie and again, the whole plot that he's involved with toward the end. Josh, you say this is 2/3 of a good movie. I think that the first 2/3 are what's really good. And as we get to the ending, it just becomes more and more ridiculous. And I'm asked more and more to suspend my belief about what these people are doing. And it becomes less of a mystery. And when it's a mystery, it's more fun.
That's fair. next we're gonna talk about my beloved The Counselor, one of just like the weirdest movies that's been made in the last like 20 years. I think this is Ridley Scott directing a simultaneously like incredibly trashy and incredibly pretentious crime thriller with Michael Fassbender as a lawyer who gets mixed up in the drug cartel. Also features Penelope Cruz and a trifecta, I would say, of insane over the top performances from Cameron Diaz, Javier Bardem, and Brad Pitt. It is a movie that features decapitations, Cameron Diaz having sex with a car, but also has these like deep philosophical conversations about everything from like diamonds to like the us having to live with like the our choices and like the negative outcomes of that. And I have to preface by saying I'm a huge fan of Cormac McCarthy, the late writer, who most people probably know for The Road and No Country for Old Men, who this is his one screenplay credit. And maybe part of my perverse enjoyment of this movie, aside from just how weird it is as an object, is I really love Cormac McCarthy's writing, and like I could sit and watch a movie where just sort of like Brad Pitt just like sits there drinking a Heineken, just like delivering Cormac McCarthy dialogue for like 10 straight minutes without talking. But I'm on an island because you guys don't see the beauty in The Counselor and its majesty.
I will say that I'm glad you love it. Like every movie needs its defenders. I was going back and looking at my review for this one, and I wasn't nearly as hard on it as I remember being, but all the things that you like about it are kind of what make it not work for me. I agree. Cormac McCarthy is an incredible novelist. A novel is not a movie. And I feel like when you pair Cormac McCarthy's source material with somebody who like knows how to adapt it for a different medium, like the Coens do with No Country for Old Men, I think it works a lot better. I also think that Cameron Diaz is profoundly miscast in this film. When she's cast right, fantastic. She does something similar in this film as she does in Vanilla Sky. And I think she's incredible in Vanilla Sky. She's terrifying in that movie. It does not work here. And which doesn't help when it feels like Brad Pitt and Javier Bardem especially know exactly what kind of movie they're in. And she does not. And I don't know if that's a Ridley Scott thing where he's giving all of them different directions, but it feels like depending which character is on screen is they're all trying to make a different movie.
Yeah, I found this film cold, dark, depressing, and like Cormac McCarthy, he's a great writer. There's too much dialogue in this film. There's, people just speechify at each other endlessly. And Josh,
I cannot deny that. I cannot deny that that's what happens.
And Josh, I agree with you. I'm not, all the great actors that are in this film, none of them seem to be performing opposite each other. They are in completely different movies. It doesn't work at all for me. And it bombed. I mean, considering the names who were involved in this film.
Yeah.
It bombed for a reason, Jesse. I know it's dear to your heart, but most people hate this film.
I just want to be on record that if any local theaters want to allow me to do so, I will gladly host a screening of the director's cut of The Counselor that fixes a lot of the narrative confusion in the movie. And I don't care who it is, anyone who worked on this movie, I would love to interview you because I'm fascinated by whatever like weird monstrosity was like birthed out of like the way I view this movie is like these are a lot of like very prestige Hollywood people that like came together and just made like a weird depraved movie, and like this is like the deformed Cronenberg baby that like came out of it, and that's why I love it. But I'm sure you guys are a big fan of Exodus Gods and Kings, which is
yeah, absolutely. This is
what if Moses was a badass,
right? What are you doing, Ridley? Remaking the story that Cecil B. DeMille made, that is the definitive story on television every year at Passover, and is an absolute masterpiece. I mean, like maybe one of the 10 best films ever made. And Ridley Scott decides to make his version of it. It's an abomination. And no one, I'm telling you, no one should make the Ten Commandments story after, because the version that Cecil B. DeMille made cannot be topped. Period. End of story.
It's another thing, kind of like Robin Hood. You know what story I'm kind of good on? Like, I don't need any more versions of it. The Tale of Moses.
This is also where we get one of the classic, oh my God, Ridley quotes of all time, which is when people are like, why are you casting, notable Egyptians, Christian Bale, Joel Edgerton, Aaron Paul in this movie? And he's like, well, because if I cast actual Egyptians and I have to put like Muhammad so-and-so's name on the poster, that's not, and I'm like, oh my God, Ridley, shut up. Stop talking.
Can I say though? I think that's the least of this movie's. This movie is hot diarrhea, guys. Like this is like, this rivals the Columbus movie as just like I think like his weakest movie. That is just like, it is at best we just all forget that this happened. But afterwards,
it's terrible.
He made The Martian, which is a really good movie that I think we would all agree belongs in the top category.
Absolutely. Yeah. Talk about your comebacks, man.
Yeah. And Jesse, you hit on it earlier. I mean, the notion that this guy sort of did, between Body of Lies, Robin Hood, Prometheus, The Counselor, you love The Counselor, and Exodus, you're really like, okay, he's done. He's tapped out. And then he comes back with The Martian, which is great and so watchable. And the entire world watched this movie and went, yes, and they're rooting for the main character. That's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's another good example of kind of like, I think of this movie as kind of a weird companion piece to Thelma and Louise, because it's another example of him getting a great script, a really likable movie star at the center. I mean, I know there's a huge cast of this movie, but I think the Matt Damon piece is so essential.
He kills it.
And then Ridley being able to take those elements and give it this kind of this style and this epic grandeur that like then turns it into like a big hit that I forget if it won Oscars, but was certainly nominated for a bunch of awards as on top of being a big hit that general moviegoers and critics and people in Hollywood seemed really excited by. And that kind of, as I said, that mixture of like the right star with a good script and then a director that knows how to not run over those elements, but sort of like add their extra pizzazz to it and then turn it into something else.
And not only that, it's a movie that celebrates smart people being good at their jobs.
Yeah.
And
it's a great kind of workplace movie in a weird way.
In an era where like you either have to be like an amazing action hero or something like that, just to have the central conflict not be, is there somebody trying to like, some soulless guy going like, no, he needs to just die. Like, no, it's just all people going like, we want to do this, but is it worth risking the lives of a bunch of other people to maybe save this guy? Like, there's a real sort of moral quandary in a movie where nobody's really the bad guy. And I like that.
So, for the sake of time, I'm going to run really fast through the next one so we can get to talking about Gladiator 2. But I don't think any of us are going to, go to bat that hard for Alien Covenant. I would probably put it in the C category for me, just because I think the first hour of that movie rips and is really scary. Your mileage may vary on the weirder Michael Fassbender parts where he's like trying to connect Alien more specifically to Prometheus. All the Money in the World, which I know I saw, I don't really remember anything about. I get kind of confused with that other Getty. There was like a Getty TV show that came out around the same time. And I feel like this movie's only legacy is when they had to hastily recast Kevin Spacey's role.
Yep.
And,
Yeah, that's literally the only thing I remember about it.
Yeah. I mean, Christopher Plummer, fun in it. I think Mark Wahlberg's really miscast. I kind of don't remember anything about this movie. I say we put it in the C category.
I could go B or C on it. For what it is, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there was something to do with like because it was coming out at the same time as there was a TV show running about the same thing, I was just a little like, I'm burnt out on this story. Like, I get it. Are you guys in agreement with me that Last Duel is maybe up there with The Martian as like the best late Ridley Scott movie?
Yes, it's a great 100%. Movie.
Really good. Like,
I was really bummed when this one fell through the cracks, because it's Ridley Scott, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck doing Rashomon. Like, it's an incredible film.
Yeah, and I think like all the performances, Damon, Adam Driver, Jodie Comer, even I like Ben Affleck in like 2 scenes as, what if I play this French lord as like a horny frat bro? It's just like a chef's kiss choice. And yeah, it's another example of like Scott getting a really good script, and he can give you the scale and all the like historical detail in the battles, but yet it's also, you know, like you said, Josh, it's Rashomon, but around sort of a rape trial in the Middle Ages, and finding fun ways to sort of play with perspective in this movie. I think it's really underrated.
I think it is so hard to take a genre that has been done to death by Hollywood, something like, you know, swords and knights and all that other kind of stuff, and find a new angle on it. And that's what I love about this movie, the way it changes perspectives, the way we sort of hear, you know, what's going on from a bunch of different characters with really strong actors at its core. I think the only thing that keeps this movie from being like a movie that's very much in the public consciousness and a big hit was it came out during the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
When people just weren't going to theaters. And so you had to like really
and to
seek
also
it out.
speak like, as you know, I remember this movie getting announced and seeing the trailers for it. And even like I really like the movie as much as you guys do, but I admit at the time when it was coming out, I was like, I don't know that I want to see that. That just sounds like a huge bummer. And
That's
like,
fair.
I don't know that Ridley Scott, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck are the people I want like making a Me Too movie. And
the only thing
to my surprise, like it actually, you know, is one of the more underrated studio movies of the last several years.
I'll say I had this in the A category.
Yeah, it was flipping. I've only seen it once. I should watch it again. That's the only reason I put it in the B category, of just sort of like, I wonder what I would think rewatching it. But I remember being, funnily enough, this was, I think, the first Atlanta Film Critics screening that I went to when I moved here to Atlanta, and walked out and was like, that was really good. I'm glad I saw that. Good job, Ridley.
Super underrated movie that I think that as the years go by might have the best chance of being rediscovered and sort of reassessed more than some of his other works. Because like you said, I think, you know, the pandemic didn't help. And I think this one has a real good shot to be a movie where people are like, where was I when this was out? What the heck?
Mm-hmm.
Why did I, you know? And so, yeah, really, really liked it a lot.
So before we get to Gladiator 2, I think I'm going to put House of Gucci and Napoleon both in the C categories. I think movies that the parts of them I enjoy.
House of Gucci's a fail. House of Gucci is an F.
Well,
Same.
See, I would argue, I think the stuff in both of these movies that I like are the parts when they lean more into being a comedy. And when they're not leaning into being a comedy, I think these movies fall flat on their face.
See, I think with House of Gucci, it doesn't work as much for me as it does in Napoleon. And I know I'm in the minority on Napoleon. It's not as A level at all. I think it's a solid B Ridley Scott movie if you look at it as this is Veep with Napoleon. I think that's what he's trying to do. And I think I don't think it's an accident that it was conceived during an era that we're getting ready to revisit. And I think that this is Ridley Scott trying to make a lot of statements about idiots in politics.
What do you guys think about the story that came out recently of him basically confirming that Paul Thomas Anderson did rewrites on Napoleon? I read that and I was like, that totally makes sense. With like some of the humor in that movie.
That would explain the tonal issues with the movie.
Yeah.
With both of these films, it feels like the director, the actors, the screenwriter are all making different movies.
1,000%.
Especially House of Gucci.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
you know,
definitely.
You talk about people being on a different page. Jared Leto's on a different planet than everybody else in the House of Gucci. And I'm not sure I'm not sure that his performance is bad. It's just weird, and it's kind of fun.
That's like, I don't know that I could say like Gaga, Pacino, and Jared Leto are good in House of Gucci, but they are definitely the scenes in House of Gucci that, for better or for worse, I enjoyed watching the most.
Yeah, but
That's
Adam
fair.
Driver like isn't even in the same realm of as them. Yeah, and Napoleon to me was a little bit the same. It's long, it's boring. The battles are great. Look, we know Ridley can do battles. There's no question about that. But with Napoleon, it's too introspective. I feel like the stuff with his personal relationships and his political relationships just feel completely disconnected from each other in the movie. I got Gucci as an F. Napoleon is a C for me.
So let's talk about, we finally gotten here. Gladiator 2. We're dropping this episode on Monday. The embargo has just now lifted. Josh, you did not see the movie, so Jason and I are going to.
I'm seeing it in about a week, so I'll still get to see it before it opens in time to let people know what I think. But depending on when this drops, feel free to go nuts with your discussion. You don't have to worry about me.
Yeah, we will. I think we can avoid super spoilery things while we can still talk about the themes and stuff. Jason, what did you think of Gladiator 2, especially considering the, I would say, suspiciously overhyped social media reactions that were coming out of the initial screenings? What was your takeaway? Kind of now, I guess, 24 hours since we saw the movie.
So early on, when the first half hour, 45 minutes of this film, I was in awe of the scope and the spectacle of it. It opens with a battle and a siege of a city that is intense. It's real. It's epic in a scale that we don't see very often in movies. And the reports are this movie cost somewhere between $250 and $300 million. And if you told me they spent every dime of that on the opening scene, I'd be like, yep, I can believe that. It doesn't look like CGI, even though it had to be. It's just unbelievably impressive. And after 20 minutes, 30 minutes of this film, I was like, I am watching Ridley Scott win a Best Director Oscar right now. Finally, this man who has made some super important films, I am on my way to watching it happen, and I was in love with it. And then, there are too many characters. Once he gets to Rome, there are just tons of characters. I don't know their names. I couldn't describe them to you other than, that guy that does that thing. There's too much happening. The script really, really falls apart toward the end. And I don't think this is a spoil. I don't think this is giving away too much. Toward the end, characters sort of start shifting alliances and the such. Yeah. And at one point, it reminded me of the scene in Batman versus Superman where Superman says, "Oh, our mothers have the same." Batman realizes they both have a mom named Martha, and suddenly they're best friends. I was just like, "What? Why? What? Hello?" In this movie, the same kind of thing happens where two significant characters suddenly go, "No, you're my ally. You're not my enemy anymore." And you're like, "What? Huh?" How it comes out of the blue. I don't think that this is a C movie by any stretch of the imagination. To me, the scope and the grandeur of the film won me over more than the story lost me. But I mean, the story's bad. The script is just bad. It's not nearly on a level with the original, which was seamless and made sense. And I've talked earlier, you could follow what the characters were thinking and doing. In this movie, most of the time I was like, I have no idea what that person is. But I'm enjoying watching it because it's really gorgeous.
Yeah, I made just some quick notes when I was leaving the theater, and then I guess we could throw it to you, Josh, if you have any questions or anything about the movie that you're like, I'm really fascinated to hear what you think about X aspect. But I would say the things about it I liked. I definitely agree with you, Jason. The sheer spectacle and scope of it is, we've kind of beat it over the head. Ridley Scott can do spectacle as good as anyone in the movies. And this, I enjoyed even the lean into a little bit of a more operatic, borderline silly, grotesque scale that he is going for in this movie, even to the like gladiatorial battles where he's like, throw in cannibalistic monkeys, a rhino, we're gonna flood the Colosseum. Like he is leaning into a
Jesse,
sort of,
we should. I want to get Josh's reaction to the fact that there is a gladiator battle with sharks.
yes.
Nice.
Which like the historians out there will probably be like darn you, Ridley. But like I enjoyed when the movie was sort of leaning into like, I am taking you into this like garish world of just like excess and blood and violence that Rome has become. I also, of the performances, I mean, it's kind of hard not to have fun watching Denzel just sort of like chew the scenery and just sort of enjoy kind of like being his like most charismatic self. Weirdly enough, I kind of wish the whole movie was just about him, because he's probably the aspect of the movie I had the most fun watching. Stuff that I didn't think work, I'm not gonna sell my Paul Mescal stock, but I think maybe last night was a realization that like stoic badass is not the best use of Paul Mescal. Like the guy has the physique and the sort of athleticism to do these really intense athletic like hand-to-hand combat sequences, but I feel like Paul Mescal, he's best like he's a teddy bear. Like his best roles are, I think, you sort of seeing that underneath this like hunky man is actually this sort of like soft, gentle soul, and him just sort of playing like stoic warrior kind of, I think, robs him of some personality. And he doesn't have that thing that Crow kind of had in the first movie of like, Crow is at his best, I think, when he's like bottled up rage, and rage that is being just sort of like, you can sense that like this guy wants to rip your head off, but
Right.
is like using every muscle in his body to like suppress that emotion and channel it in some way. And I do agree with you too, Jason. Like, I think the script really gets into trouble when it is trying to be a very direct sequel to the first movie, and is very
it's awful.
and
It's
you can
so
really feel
bad.
the movie straining and kind of tripping over itself to be like, we need to find a way to like, this movie needs to continue the story from the first movie, and it never really, which is unsurprising because they've been trying to make Gladiator II for decades. There's like that famous Nick Cave script where like Maximus gets resurrected and has to go kill Jesus or something like that. And like, you would think that after all this time you were like, well, sounds like they figured out a way to do a sequel, and maybe it'll be kind of like Twisters, where it's like, yeah, we're doing a sequel, but it's basically just like a different story in the same world. And nope, they're really trying to be like, this is a continuation of the same story you saw, and we got to connect people to people from the first movie. And I did not really buy when this movie was doing that. I also just kind of want to, pick your brain on this, Jason. How much do you really care about the sanctity of Rome? Because there's kind of this, as we talked about, like, the drama of the first movie is a revenge story that then becomes like, we need to take down this tyrannical ruler. In this movie, I feel like the drama becomes this ideological battle between, like, without getting into spoilers, one side saying Rome is inherently corrupt and evil, and we need to basically explode it from the inside out, like poison it from the inside and let the empire crumble. And then the other side, I would say the hero side of this movie, is basically arguing, no, what Rome needs is to be a beacon of light, and all it really needs is a stoic leader who it believes in sensible government. And I'm not saying that that's a bad ideological position to be on, but I found that sort of weird moderate position to be a strange one, considering the 2 hours that led up to it, where I was basically like, Rome seems like the most barbaric, evil place in the world, and to basically be at the end being like, no, but what we really need is someone who is a leader that understands kind of the differences between responsible power and use of the government is sort of like where this movie lands, which at the end I was kind of like, I don't know that I'm fully with it after after sitting through that, but maybe that's just me. Do you believe in the power of Rome as an institution, Jason?
Yeah, no. There are two things about what you're talking about that bothered me. One is this movie is set, I'd say, 20-ish years after the first one. And the end of the first movie, the idea is sort of that, yes, it's a revenge story, but his revenge has caused Rome to be given back to the people and taken away from the emperor. You know, all the good that happens at the very end of the original Gladiator movie is completely undone at the start of this movie. You're sort of like, oh, Maximus gave his life for like, what, 5 good years maybe at the most? And then Rome returned to being a horrible, terrible place that's
an arguably even worse place.
yeah, way worse. So almost from the get-go, I was like, wait, this kind of sucks. You're destroying all the accomplishments of this wonderful movie that I saw. And then the other thing is all the political infighting that goes on, as you mentioned, all the attempts to connect it back to the original movie. None of it makes all that much sense, and it strains everything. We're trashing it. I want to be clear, like, again, I think it's a Ridley Scott B, and the spectacle saves it. But this script, as long as they took to come up with to make this sequel, I would have thought they could have found a better idea than they have in this movie. Because frankly, a lot of it is like just a remake of the first one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I'm still wrestling with what I think about it, but it's definitely in that like B- C+ zone, and time will tell. Like walking out of the theater, I was like, I had enough fun with the big action set pieces of this movie to, have had a pretty good 2.5 hours or however long this is, but definitely in thinking about it afterwards was sort of like that movie felt a lot bumpier, and I kind of wish it was more willing to sort of be in the spirit of the first movie and less straining itself to this needs to be a direct sequel to the first movie, and that kind of creates a lot of the issues.
Your opinion of the movie goes down throughout the film. Like I said, I love the first hour or so, first half hour. Your opinion of the movie goes down throughout the film, and it keeps on going down after you left the theater. Like the way I felt the moment I walked out and the way I feel now, I can tell it's taken even more of a turn for the worse.
Well, Josh, do you have any questions for us about Gladiator?
Have we lowered your expectations enough?
So yeah, I don't think I'm gonna have the buzz problem that I had with the original, where I'm like, is it gonna live up to the? No, most of the questions I have, I'm gonna figure out on my own. But some of my concerns before seeing it, you aren't making me feel better about, which is this is an insanely stacked cast. How can he make sure that he's servicing all these great actors? And it sounds like the answer is he doesn't. So I'm just wondering, and obviously don't tell me or our listeners, right? But how long are some of these actors that I'm looking forward to seeing actually in the film?
I would say there are some big names. Like I would say, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that like the Pedro Pascal role is not as, he is a very clear like supporting player.
That's what I had. That's what I thought was coming, but
which is a pity, by the way, because I feel like his story and his interaction with the emperors to me would have been a more interesting story maybe than Paul Mescal's story.
I fully agree. I was much more interested in sort of the sort of like palace intrigue and kind of
the general who is sick of war and doesn't know why we're doing this is to me more compelling than another revenge story that we saw in the first one, and frankly was done way better in the first one.
Yeah, I think if you clash that with the Denzel character, which is way more of like, I am an agent of chaos sort of person, then I think you get into a much more interesting movie dramatically than I agree, Jason. I think you kind of don't need the Paul Mescal role, and that
and he's the main character.
Right, part of that problem with that character is like that whole character is the like we really need to recreate and sort of carry the torch of the first movie. Well, guys, it's been an hour and a half. I've kept you from your families for too long, but we gotta talk about Exodus, Gods and Kings. We got to talk about whether or not we would date Marion Cotillard or sell a winery. I think we did a lot of great work tonight.
Talked a lot of Russell Crowe.
A lot of
Thanks,
Russell
Jesse.
Crowe.